It would be the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another, with the change of lead singers sharply dividing their fan base. In this episode, we're talking about Diamond David Lee Roth and the monster Van Halen album 1984. Stay with us. Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. If you're new, welcome. If you've been listening and taking the journey with us, welcome back. We appreciate the support. You can find us on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook at 3324 podcast. And with me, as always, is Eric.
Hello, Dean. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
How's it going?
It is going. It is going. We're setting the Wayback Machine to 1984. Oddly enough, the year and the album. So, this is by Van Halen, when they were still known as Van Halen before the Van Hagar stuff started coming. But we'll definitely get to that. So, here's some of the vital stats that you'll need to set you up on the journey you're about to take with us. So, this was released in January of 1984. It was produced by Ted Templeman, who had produced all of the previous Van Halen albums up to this point, but this would be his last one for a couple. Reached number 2 on the charts behind Thriller, which oddly enough, Eddie Van Halen played on. He played on Beat It. It went diamond in 1999, sold 10 million copies. So there's a diamond for Diamond Dave. He earned it. There was four singles released. And my favorite stat is coming up if you've been here. So Jump went to number 1, and it was actually Van Halen's only number 1 single. Then I'll Wait and Panama both hit number 13. My favorite stat, when two singles not number 1 hit the same number randomly. And then Hot for Teacher hit number 56. Van Halen was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2007. And that was a mess. These guys, this is just a story of like success and just disaster and bedlam, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But in 1984, the fact that Thriller was still just dominating everything led me to discover a really interesting statistic about 1984. I'm gonna throw a pop quiz question your way.
Okay.
How many different albums hit number 1 in 1984? So how many different albums, different art, it could be the same art, it doesn't make a difference, but how many different number 1 albums were there in 1984?
I would say not many.
You would be correct, but this is insane. There were only 5 number 1 albums in 1984. That's amazing. There was only 5 albums that hit number 1 because they stayed for so long. Starting off and that's why Van Halen just could not even crack it. They were up against Thriller, which from the beginning of the year, it was already in 83 and it was overlapping into 84.
Yeah.
And it stayed at number 1 until April 14th of 84. Then the soundtrack to Footloose, Peter Quill's favorite movie, was for another 3 months at number 1.
Really? Did not know that.
Somehow,
that's surprising. Wow.
Somehow Huey Lewis and the News was able to get sports in for 1 week.
That's right.
That's the third album of the year. Then Bruce Springsteen stays at number 1 for about a month with Born in the USA.
Yep.
And then on August 4th until the end of the year, Purple Rain.
Okay.
So this 1984 was literally defined by 5 albums.
Why am I thinking Purple Rain came out in 85? Wow.
It went through the end of the year, so it definitely bled into 85. Okay. You absolutely bled into it because it closed out it closed out 84.
Mm.
So I didn't go to 85, but if it was number one on December 29th, I'm guessing into 85 it was, and it was probably still feeling
I just
the ripple
remember it
effect of
being
that.
really huge that year. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so
well into the
five
summer.
albums.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like
Mhm.
now it's like someone's hitting number one and they're number one for a week. Five artists, and oddly enough, two of them were soundtracks, like Footloose and Purple Rain. So that's kind of really just a bizarre statistic. That's the world that Van Halen was living in at the
Mhm.
time when 1984 came out. And this was the follow up to Diver Down, which came out in 1982, which was a decent success in its own right.
It
You know,
wasn't much. It
so
wasn't much of an album, though. It was more a collection of like, uh,
covers.
covers and just leftovers. I think there was only like maybe two or three songs that they actually wrote
Yeah,
for the
I mean, there
record.
was
So
five
yeah,
covers,
yeah,
on there, and yeah, the rest
it
of
was a
them
filler. It was
were
a filler.
filler,
Yeah.
instrumental
Mhm.
interludes, just really kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, plugging the gap until they could do something else. And but despite all that, it did really well. I mean, it spent 65 weeks on the album chart.
Mm.
By 1998, had sold 4 million copies. So those covers, and Van Halen's not afraid of those covers because they had done covers in the past too, but this one really, Pretty Woman became like they made that their own,
Mhm.
and Dancing in the Street, they kind of really made those two songs their
Which I
own.
love. I love
Um,
their version of it. It's
yeah,
actually
and
one of my
they had done
favorites. Yeah.
they had done the Kinks in the past, like You Really
Yeah.
Got Me, and they
Mhm.
did You're No Good. So they're certainly adept at adapting things to
Yeah.
their style, and making it, and Van Halening it. Van Halenizing
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
The hell out of it. The
Yeah, so
Halen. Yeah.
so they absolutely were able to kind of cash in on that, and then it kind of set them up, uh, for 1984. There is some underpinnings of all's not well in the Van Halen kingdom, though.
Mhm.
Around that time,
Yeah.
Eddie Van Halen wanted to use synthesizers a little bit more, wanted to experiment with that, and got a lot of pushback, not only from David Lee Roth, but from the producer Ted Templeman,
Mhm.
of, you know, there were synthesizers to a really lesser degree on some of the older albums. You probably barely can hear them, but Eddie really wanted to experiment with that, and was kind of tamped down on Diver Down.
Yeah.
But 1984 he would just go full on, and that was somewhat of a shock to some people as well, especially the hardcore Van Halen fans, when you've got a virtuoso at an instrument
Wanting to play
leaning heavily
synthesizer.
on something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. That was a dark time, I think, for Eddie Van Halen. I think, ironically, he had just gotten married to Valerie Bertinelli at that point, but I think he was getting a lot of flack from David Lee Roth about that. I guess, because he was just wanting to live that full-on rock and roll lifestyle. We're bachelors, we're doing this, we're doing, and yeah, the whole like synthesizer thing, keyboards, and there were some employed on Fair Warning. I mean, the last couple of tracks on that record, there was some synths on that. There was, I think, on the second album as well, but not to the degree. I mean, and it's weird for me because I thought for sure when I first heard 1984. I don't want to get too much into it because I know we'll get there eventually, but I thought for sure the entire album would be a synth heavy album, and
Mm-hmm.
not just on just a couple of songs where the synth is like the lead instrument. I
Yeah,
thought for
because
sure
everyone
that he was
made such
going
a
to,
big deal about it.
yeah, exactly.
Everyone had overblown. Oh, like, oh my god! And then you think,
Right,
oh, this is going to be like a prog rock album or
right.
something.
I thought for
With
sure he was going to
ELP.
be, yeah, more like layering the synths in with
Yeah,
the guitar, but that wasn't really the case. He replaced the guitar with the synths, and for the most part on 3 songs, and the
yeah.
rest of the album is pretty much
Straightforward Van Halen.
straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And I remember when this came out, I had Diver Down. I was always a moderate Van Halen fan. I had Fair
yeah,
Warning. I had Fair Warning, and I had Diver Down. And when this came out, Jump just exploded. And 1984, again, we're gonna talk about it a lot, but when we talk about albums from this era, the MTV effect was in full swing, and Van Halen absolutely took advantage of it. They did not flinch and shy away from using MTV and maximizing the exposure to just grow the legend or the perceived hedonism of Van Halen and that whole party atmosphere. So yeah, so 84, I was absolutely listening to it. I had it. Everybody was kind of just really, this was the one that brought Van Halen really out into the forefront because Jump was just everywhere.
It was the part of the soundscape. We graduated high school that year.
We did.
It was all over the place. I mean, on the radio, MTV. I mean, it was literally a staple, one of the staple albums at the time. So
you might have graduated high school. I'm not admitting to that. So let's give that's our history. Let's give a little bit of Van Halen's history. Right. They were formed in 1974, but they didn't really start recording. Their first album wasn't until 78. So they're definitely knocking around and definitely a creature of the 70s. We think of them really as so much of the 80s and beyond, but they were there early days. In 1972, they were known as Genesis.
Really?
But they had to change their name because it was already a band in Britain that was named Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to change. So they went through. So then there's the next name they came up with was Mammoth. And Mammoth has made a return in 2020, 2021. So we'll get to Mammoth later on. But yeah, always, guitar centric. And always, David Lee Roth is like the clown prince of rock. Really. He's like the P.T. Barnum Carnival Barker. He's
accurate.
He's easily one of the greatest, and I'm going to clarify this. He's easily one of the greatest front men in rock and roll.
Yeah.
He is not one of the greatest vocalists in rock and roll. So there's a difference there, right? A front man is one thing, a vocalist is another. Mm-hmm. And David Lee Roth is one of the great front men. He understood and loved, he chewed up the limelight. He loved it, and he thrived in it. And it's his over the top personality that was almost like the perfect foil to Eddie's just virtuoso guitar playing. Mm-hmm. And kind of somewhat low key personality. And you've got David Lee Roth selling Van Halen to the masses with his antics, his jumps and his kicks and everything. Yeah. Getting them known for that. But Eddie Van Halen really was the reason, for the band, and the reason that everybody really latched onto him as the greatest guitar player and of that time. And re-listening to this, it's not hard to understand why.
No, I'll agree to that. Almost to I think the guitar on this record is done almost to a certain degree where at first, you first hear it back then, it was fantastic, the noodling, but I kind of feel like hearing it recently, I kind of feel like it was more Eddie Van Halen wanting to put his voice right next to David Lee. To me, it's almost like they were competing with one another at this point as to who was in charge of this band. That's what the album kind of feels like to me now when I listen to it. Because, some of those guitar chops in there they're there, but then he's like overdubbing like more, and he's putting more on this thing. And it's like sometimes not really necessary. It's almost to the point where it's almost you're doing a little too much here. And you're trying to say something with this, so that's the kind of feeling I get when I listen to it now compared to the older stuff where he was doing a lot of interesting stuff, but it was kind of layered in. It was more, blending in with the song and just sort of like the whole mix was, but here it's like these things really stand out as almost like a voice, so you got him and David Lee Roth, like even David Lee Roth's vocals were like amped up on this album as well. So you got that back and forth, that give and take thing going on this record, almost to you can almost, they're almost dueling in a sense to me. I don't know. I mean, do you agree with that, or
Well, to an extent, because they were really I mean, they're a 4-piece band, and they never were tried to be anything more than that in the studio. It was very just raw and bare bones.
Mm-hmm.
But Eddie Van Halen started to evolve, right? So he wants to layer and fool around with synths and layering, and
right.
you would see that come to its fruition in 5150,
Mm-hmm.
and that was where probably where the divide started, is that Eddie wanted to do these other things and expand the sound, as it were, and David Lee Roth and Ted Templeman were really pushing against that and saying, no, just like play that down, we don't go there. Eddie Van Halen turned out to be right with 5150. So you can't really fault him for wanting to do more, and it must be it must be a cross to bear, is that you're a virtuoso guitar player, and that's great, but that's all everybody wants to hear from you then, right? They don't want to hear you doing something else.
He did it to great effect. There's no doubt. He put himself out there. He really made, it's like, look, guys, I have something to say here. I think more so on this record. So he started opening that door of, like, when you say 5150, that sound, developing that sound at the crossover there. But, this was the entryway into that. And absolutely. I feel like, the entire band, it was more sort of like involved with the older stuff. So, Eddie was fantastic then, but it was just more, like I said before, it was like more layered in, more. It didn't stand out as much. He was doing.
You can only take that so far. I mean, he's got a particular style.
Right. Yeah.
And album after album, if you're just going to go that road, it's going to wear thin. So there was a change that was needed, whether the rest of the band felt it or not. Something had to give. I mean, they had just gotten tired of themselves also. So this would kind of cement their superstar status, but it would also blow the band up and splinter it and change the dynamic in a weird way too, because after this, Eddie and Alex Van Halen really kind of took control, became really, really strange, a lot of strange decisions, a lot of weird stuff that went on. But for now, let's get into 1984. Let's part the sands of time and go back to a gentler time when I graduated high school with Eric. And we're going to jump into this, and we're going to start breaking down some of these tracks. And the thing that when I listen to it again, now, with Van Halen, it's more about like the song. It's more about like attitude and musicianship than it is about substance. Van Halen had a certain formula, and they stuck to it. You didn't hear crooning ballads. You didn't hear deep thoughts. It was just kind of like, where have all the good times gone, and partying and for the most part, that kind of stuff. And so those lyrics and those songs were mainly used just as a vehicle to deliver the Van Halen sound, and to deliver what Eddie was going to be doing. And that's not to demean or diminish what David Lee Roth was doing, because he's got a certain role to fill in here too. And he does fill it. He's got that Carnival Barker style of vocals and singing that kind of brings you in, like you're in on the party and you're invited, and it's just going to be a blast. And then you've got Eddie like lurking in the background, just waiting to like unleash.
Yeah.
So as people were probably confused when they put this album on, it starts off with an instrumental, which is straight up synthesizers. This sounds something like out of Steve Miller band Book of Dreams.
That's right.
It is that so synth, swirly, heavy, just all the different, he's really making a statement and saying,
is this Steve Miller? Is it Rush? Is it, like in 2112 here? It's bizarre, luckily it's only like just not even a couple minutes long. It's just really short.
Enough to probably give people heart attacks and strokes that were like listening to Diver Down and just put this on and say, oh my God, the new Van Halen. And they're like, what is this? Is this Styx or what, what happened here? Who do I punch? And then you get Jump, which again, synth heavy, but oh my God, it's got the fattest, roundest synth sound.
Yeah.
It's like a big pill. It's like a big pillow.
It works. There's an energy to it that just, once the drums kick in and there's a renewed, if they were having problems, you really didn't know it.
Yeah, this has
With
a
the
bounce
song. I
to
mean,
it. It's got a
there's such a renewed energy. There's enthusiasm, and they just, and especially when you watch the music video,
yeah.
I always get a rise out of that, of watching the sort of live performance, like
Yeah,
David Lee Roth doing his thing, and they're having a blast. And Eddie Van Halen actually smiles,
yeah,
for the first time in the video. Which was
so
a big deal.
It's just one of those songs. I mean, how could this not be a hit? It's just got that driving beat, and embracing the synthesizers, but not in a British invasion way, not like Flock of Seagullsy. It was it was closer to a throwback to Styx or some of the 70s rock bands that used it. He was using it like that. And then the funny thing about this is when I was listening to it again, it's like, oh, here comes the guitar solo, and he does, but then he does a synth solo, which is longer than the guitar solo. And it never really struck me before, but he put an extended synthesizer solo after the guitar solo, and it was even longer. So again, another statement that, here's the guitar stuff, but we're going to go back to, for this song, we're going to just jump right back into that really, that's just thick and just round and just that synth sound. I can't get over it.
It's almost like really the synth. It's like a guitar riff, really. When you think about it, it's like beep, beep.
Absolutely.
It's like, he's playing it as if it were less of a melodic sort of chord thing. It's more punchy. It's used to great effect. And
even the synth solo is kind of the way he would play a guitar solo, right. somewhat. He doesn't have the freedom that he has on the guitar, but it's grounded in his guitar playing. That's a great point that you make, where it's kind of a guitar player getting into a keyboard for the first time, or really embracing it and adapting it, and kind of you get Jump, a song with guitars and synths, and they're both used to great effect. And then follows up with Panama. And I just wrote one word next to Panama on my notes: bombastic. It's just a big song from them. It feels like one, and again, you hit it on the head too with the videos. Like, you can't not associate the videos with these songs, and the like the arena, and they're on this giant stage in the music video, and it kind of sells the feeling for that song. It kind of melds it together, and you feel like this is just one of those big arena songs.
Yeah. But what I like, going back to what I said before about like the synth stuff, it was surprising to me that just the second track is a lot like their old stuff. Now we're back to the guitar. It's like, where's the synth? So I was actually, I don't know why, but I was one of those people that was actually I was embracing the fact that he was trying to do something a little bit different here, and so I don't know if I was disappointed, but because it's such a great song, but
well, he didn't want a complete mutiny at the record company, right. From the band. They'd be like,
right. But not even, like I said, not even, but he didn't like layer it in either. It wasn't in the background at all. There's no synth in the, this song whatsoever.
Yeah, straight up, just straight up classic Van Halen sound.
Yeah. Yep.
Classic big, just big sound from it. And you can't help that when you have Alex Van Halen. I mean, he's got one of those distinctive drum sounds. Yeah. Like that is very much Alex Van Halen. I don't know. It's that snare. It doesn't have like it's kind of has like that. It doesn't have like the wire. It doesn't sound like it's got the wires underneath. It's more of like a drum. His snare, but
his drums they have a very dry sound to me. There's a sort of snap to them. There's like a thudding snap, but then he works wonders on the bass drums, though. I mean, he's a master of that.
Yeah, he was known for the double bass.
Oh yeah, he's just
blowing people away.
Which of course would come later. We'll get to that with one of the other tracks. What we're talking about, but
so yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, Panama was just another one of those like kind of party songs.
Mhm.
It's not really about anything. It's kind of about a car. It's kind of about
Yeah.
women, and it's vehicles for haha corny joke. It's vehicles for them to deliver the Van Halen sound is just really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with Top Jimmy. Top Jimmy reminded me a little bit. There's three songs in this album that remind me of three different artists. Top Jimmy kind of reminds me a little bit in the beginning, and Hot for Teacher a little bit maybe. Has like a ZZ Topish, or maybe it's Hot for Teacher is more like a ZZ Topish riff in the beginning, just with that guitar. Maybe not so much Top Jimmy.
ZZ Top. I don't know about ZZ Top.
Maybe Hot for Teacher. The beginning
Yeah.
part,
Yeah.
just with that that solo guitar. It kind of sounds like LaGrange reminded me of.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, now you're with me. I knew I'd
There
get
you go.
So then, Drop Dead Legs. Okay,
My favorite. It's my favorite track.
That sounds to me like a Back in Black rewrite.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think somebody made that point. I think
What do you mean? I just did.
I think I just read that. No, seriously, I think I just I read that recently.
Really? No, I was listening to it and
track by track. I think it was Ultimate Classic Rock.
Oh, right. See, we're on the same page. I didn't read that. I just listened.
They said as much as it's almost like an AC/DC has that Back in Black vibe.
The riff is very much Back in Black. So go back if you haven't listened to this album in a long time, you may hear. Let us know if you hear some of these influences, because there's another one, another influence later on. But Drop Dead Legs to me just had it kind of copped the Back in Black riff, not necessarily the song structure, but a little bit. It's like Drop Dead Leg, it's a little bit, but not a total theft.
I just love that sort of groove to it, though. And I love that kind of stuff, and they weren't afraid to go there. You go back to Fair Warning, and that's the funkiest they would ever get. There was some heavy bass on that record and some wonderful grooves on that album. That's probably one of my favorites, as it stands out, because they were doing some interesting stuff. But yeah, Drop Dead Legs is probably my favorite track off this one.
Yeah, pretty heavy. And then Waldo, sit down, Waldo. Hot for Teacher. The video really drove the success of this song.
Absolutely.
Back then, I remember. I mean, there was they got a lot of flack for it back then. Imagine now, they wouldn't even be able to play this video.
No.
Not only with the forget about just take the subject matter, take the video away from the song Hot for Teacher. Okay, there's that. But then when you put the video with it, with the little mini Van Halen kids,
yeah,
and the teachers are stripping, and the classroom turns into like a strip runway, and they're partying and they're grabbing at the women. I mean, it's just crazy. Back then it raised a lot of eyebrows, and people were like, what is this country coming to?
Yeah.
So imagine now it would be a meltdown.
That's right.
It was just, that video was just everywhere. And again, like Van Halen understood, like they weren't afraid to like make fun of themselves. They weren't afraid to be goofy.
Mm-hmm.
They used the medium to such great effect that they got like the fans on board.
They were the ultimate party band.
You can't take that song seriously.
They were the ultimate party band.
Yeah,
the ultimate rock and roll party band. This is Van Halen. Yeah,
absolutely. So would you think that video would play today?
No way. No way. No, not in a million years. No.
Crazy. I remember that when the first time I saw like the little Van Halen, I'm like, oh my god, this is just amazing.
But there's a lot of videos that you think of Twisted Sister too. That stuff and a lot of the hair bands of the time, always with the hot chicks. Yeah.
Well, this is with
car
the kids,
but the kids. Yeah, I mean, this is
the kid Van Halen in school. And then with the adults, so that's funny. But a great song, and this is what you're talking about with Alex Van Halen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the kick in the beginning is just phenomenal.
You can't
He
even keep
owns
track of
this.
it. Yeah, you almost can't even keep track of how fast
Yeah,
he's going at one point. It becomes like it's almost like a drum roll, but with but
kick
with
drums.
kick
Yeah,
drums.
yeah, he
It's
owns the
absolutely
song.
amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, he was a force to be reckoned with.
Hmm.
You know, and that's the thing is you've got like the guitar player, like a virtuoso guitar player, and then you got like this monster drummer.
Hmm.
You have to have a gigantic, larger than life personality out in front. Otherwise, it would just be a mess. Like if and then someone's got to lay back, and that's Michael Anthony. Someone's just got to sit back and kind of watch everything. Because you can't, like, if you don't have the right personality leading that charge and being in front of all that,
Hmm.
it would be just it would be a weird situation where the drummer and the guitar player are better than the front man, and you couldn't have that. Like
No,
Roth had
not
to
for this
match.
band. No.
Yeah, he had to match them with whatever tool. He doesn't play any instruments, so his instrument was his personality and his charisma, and he had to match Eddie's guitar playing and Alex's drumming with his charisma and his
Hmm.
showmanship, as it were.
Yeah, he knew how to engage an audience. There's no
Yeah,
doubt.
he had to be just right out there.
Hmm.
So next up, my favorite song, which is "I'll Wait," which is very synth. This is very synth driven as well. Really, the counterpart or the partner to "Jump" is this one because it's got that same feel where it's got a keyboard, a synth intro. It's got a guitar solo, but then it's got more keyboards in it too. So very much in the same structure as Jump, but I really love the vocal performance by Roth on this too. This is as close as he gets to some singing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also a song. It's also might be one of their first sort of, I wouldn't say ballad, but it's a slower. It's an actual song. There's a song. There's an actual structure to the song.
Yeah,
It's
it's
that
not
they're
in a
actually trying
rush.
to say something. It's not like virtuosic musicianship happening in this song at all. It's like they're focusing. There's more focus as it being a song. So which
Yeah,
is
and this was
the first for this album.
yeah, and kind of a harbinger to 5150 because you're
Yeah.
right. Like a lot of their songs are just so quick.
Yeah.
I mean, their albums are short.
Mhm.
Diver Down was 31 minutes.
Yeah.
you know,
Fair Warning
they're-
is really short too.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're like 30-minute albums. 1984 was 33 minutes.
Mhm.
They were all short. It wouldn't be until 5150 that they made an album over 40 minutes. So their songs are just because they're just so blazing fast and they kind of burn through the idea pretty quickly because you can't really keep going back
Yeah.
to
You
Eddie
couldn't
for another
extend them.
solo
Right. You couldn't
like
extend
that.
these things. Right. So
Yeah,
they
you
are
kind
what
of had
they
to get
are.
in
And
and get
yeah,
out.
that's right. That's right.
One of those.
Mhm.
Um, this actually came out much later, but "I'll Wait" was co-written by Michael McDonald of the
Yes.
Doobie Brothers. All these things were always credited to the four members of Van Halen. They kind of did an equal partnership, even though they would come after Michael Anthony later on and say, "Well, you didn't really write anything, so sign, get your name off this, or whatever." But then it turns out that this was Michael McDonald had a hand in there too. So
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe he should do that on his solo tour.
He wasn't credited on the record
Yeah,
until I think the re-release, the
yeah, until much
remaster.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and once they started renegotiating all that, a la the Beach Boys of who really wrote this, who really
Yeah.
wrote that, and we're going to fight over it, and it gets petty and it gets out of control. It's too bad. It's too
Indeed.
bad. This is
Really.
Van Halen's it's like a Greek tragedy. It really is. Girl Gone Bad. Okay, this is another one.
Mhm.
The beginning, and you may need to go listen. You may need to go re-listen, Eric, and people that are listening, listen to the beginning of it and tell me if I'm crazy. But you actually gave it away a little bit earlier. I got a little nervous. The beginning of Girl Gone Bad sounds a little bit like Rush.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Sounds like something from Moving Pictures.
It's got that ding ding ding
Yeah,
ding
and
ding ding. It's
it's
like
got
Red
the
Barchetta. It's I know it's
yeah.
that. Yep.
I'm listening to it and I'm like,
Got that riff. Yep.
what?
Yep.
Like just the structure of it too, with his riffs and the beginning of it. I was like, wow. I was like, you don't pay it if you're not paying attention, it can get by you.
Mhm.
because you almost take Van Halen for granted. You know what you're going to get, and or you know what to expect.
Yeah.
And you're kind of listening for what you eventually know that you'll hear is these blazing, just up and down the neck riffs.
Well, you made the point that David Lee Roth, without him, they would be like a Rush type band without him. Like without that presence out front, they would be these three virtuosic musicians, much like, probably not quite like Rush, but they would. That's what they would be doing. They would be a little bit more, maybe a little bit more cerebral in that sense, or at least in their minds. And but without that goofiness that Roth brings to the band. But this
he levels it out is what he does. Is he levels out all that playing and kind of grounds it in back into rock and roll.
So
which is what he does.
That parallel to Rush with this song, with that opening. Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. So when I was listening to this, I'm like, wow, I heard so many different influences, and usually as you get older, you kind of just listen to stuff and it kind of like, whatever. But I'm listening to it and I'm just like, I'm hearing Back in Black, and I'm just hearing all these different other nuggets that maybe I wasn't aware of as much, obviously, like when I first heard this. So I really didn't have much to compare it to. But then over time, and then you listen to a bunch of other things, and it's like, oh wow, that sounds a lot like Rush, and you can't help but think that there were some of those influences, perhaps.
Well, I think, moving on to like 50, I think the overall sound of the band changed to a more commercial sort of sound. And there were a lot of, a couple of bands that just were very, very similar to that style. You think of like Whitesnake and bands like that. Maybe some of the hair, but not, I'm thinking more like, not Poison, maybe Rat, maybe.
Yeah. They were still a few years away, though. So
they were down the road. But by the time Sammy Hagar joined the band, they would kind of blend in with that sound, which was the 80s. I mean, everybody was kind of adapting, to that sound anyway. So
yeah, and then the album closes out with House of Pain, which is kind of weak. When I was listening to it, I'm like, if they had swapped the last two songs and kind of done House of Pain and then closed with Girl Gone Bad, I'm like, that might have been, to me, it might have been a little bit of a stronger finish. But it doesn't, these songs, this is not like The Stranger, where these songs, I can't think, you could probably mix these songs up and it probably wouldn't make much difference because there's not a kind of a flow, and, it doesn't seem like they're ever trying to really make a statement with the track listing and how they're arranged. So for me, I could have, you could have just taken House of Pain and not had that close out and had Girl Gone Bad do it.
Yeah. And considering the subject matter of House of Pain too, would think about it.
Yeah. So,
so it is kind of a little bit weak.
Just, not their best, or even I'll Wait would have been like a really strong, just like finish, like close out the album with something, they kind of petered out a little bit. Those songs are great. I mean, Girl Gone Bad and House of Pain, but as far as closing out the album, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, here, we're just going to kind of close up shop. And that's exactly what happened with Van Halen is they literally closed up shop with this album. It was just a splintering of personalities and I guess just animosity boiling over and all this stuff coming. But like you said, you would never hear it on this album. It doesn't sound like a group breaking up, because this album launched them into the stratosphere, as it were. Number two, this was like the breakthrough that Van Halen was working towards. They were always there, and they had some of those minor hits, Dance the Night Away and You're No Good and stuff like that. And a lot of that album oriented rock stuff.
Yeah.
This pushed them into the forefront, and they maximized it with the videos. And you see, like you said, the good time they're having. You would never know that there was all this underpinning of something's going to give.
Mm-hmm.
Something's going to explode. They became too big for the personalities. Roth, his ego and his personality at this point probably couldn't fit in the room anyway. You know, and he was being pulled in a different direction. And then Eddie Van Halen and Alex and Michael Anthony were on a different track. You know, and then David Lee Roth goes and puts out the 2 solo singles. He does California Girls, and that kind of gets a little buzz with him as a solo artist. And then it was over. It was over. This was their 6th album, and it would be one of their biggest selling ones, also. Even outside of the Sammy Hagar stuff, which
this one and their debut were both their best selling. Yeah,
I would have thought that some of the other ones would have blown this away, like OU812, or even 5150. I mean, because when those came out, especially OU812, because it was the one after 5150, and everyone's like, oh, okay, this actually works with Sammy Hagar. You know, and they were pretty popular. That was a really great. I loved OU812. I thought it was one of their better Sammy Hagar albums. But they would just shatter into a million pieces. David Lee Roth would try and replicate Van Halen with Steve Vai, and he's like, I'm going to get a virtuoso bass player with Billy Sheehan, and then they get Matt Bissonette or Greg Bissonette. Matt. No, Greg. Greg is the drummer. His brother Matt would come in on bass after Billy Sheehan would leave. So he puts together his own little mini Van Halen that we're gonna rock it and we're gonna do it. And he comes out with Eat 'Em and Smile, which was his first solo release. Did you ever listen to that?
Yeah, because you played it all the time.
Well, there you go.
No, I just remember, we. 1984. I don't think we played in 1984 half as much as you played 5150. Driving around the car, and then and then the David Lee Roth. You were really into David Lee Roth. I remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge fan. And so
it was a lot of great stuff there. I mean, it was a great time for that type of music. It didn't make a lot of demands on you. No. But it was. But Van Halen was great music, though. See, there's a difference. There's some of those bands that don't make a lot of demands out of you, but they're just not great bands, or they don't
had
do anything.
The talent to back it up.
Yeah, Van Halen
musicianship too. Yeah,
made accessible music when they could have done something different if they wanted to, but they're like, no, this is how we're going to deliver, and we like this lifestyle, and this is how we're going to present our product, and they did. It's not like they were manipulated into doing anything. I mean, this is what they projected. So
they chose. Yeah.
So then when I remember when Roth left, I was like, oh my God, this is what's going to happen. And then I was thinking it was going to be like an Aerosmith thing. I was like, oh, he'll come. I was right, because back then I said he'll come back just like Steven Tyler did to Aerosmith or Joe Perry or whatever. I said they'll get back together, but that was so far off. Mm-hmm. And then they announced Sammy Hagar, the Red Rocker. Oddly enough, I had bought his cassette. Was it Voice of America? It had I Can't Drive 55 on it. Mm-hmm. But he was not there was a lot of head scratching. I don't know if you remember at the time.
Yeah, because he was a guitarist himself.
What? Sammy Hagar? What? Like what? He's like,
yeah, he had his own thing. Like his,
he was coming up.
Join a band, like, he just needs some session players behind him. He played guitar. He had his own shtick going on. Like, and then he joins Van Halen. So who's playing what there?
Yeah, and
obviously his guitar playing is more subdued than Van Halen's. So I don't know. Yeah, it was an odd pairing for sure.
Yeah, very very strange. And Ted Templeman would go with Roth to produce Eat 'Em and Smile. So that would be the end of Ted Templeman for a couple of albums with Van Halen, and Van Halen would grab Mick Jones from Foreigner to help produce 5150. And regardless of the fact that Sammy Hagar does bring a couple of things into the mix, which you mentioned, is he's a guitar player. Is he virtuoso? No. Competent? Absolutely. So that just by default just expanded the sound if needed. Mm-hmm. Where Sammy Hagar can play guitar and like in concert when they're live and help support the sound as well. which they didn't have that option before because David Lee Roth didn't really play anything.
Yeah, because now you have the option of Eddie doing much more soloing, much more lead, and then having that rhythm behind it.
He could jump on the keyboards and
much fuller. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Sammy Hagar could be playing the rhythm stuff while when they're doing these songs. So it did totally bring a different dynamic. I remember when 5150 came out and I bought it and I turned it on and the first song is Good Enough. And Sammy Hagar was just ripping. His vocal was just ripping. I'm like, okay, I was digging it, and a lot of people weren't. There was a divide between the David Lee Roth, purists and the Van Halen purists, which is nothing wrong with, and Sammy Hagar, and it's like, what is this guy doing in this album? But God, you know what? It paid off.
Yeah, but that's the thing. He had more talent in the musical. He had a much better voice, and I guess, but people didn't want that. They wanted Diamond Dave. They wanted that goofball out front. Like you said before, he didn't have much of a voice. Yeah. Sammy Hagar delivered on the vocals. He delivered the rhythm guitar, and
I think they got taken a little bit more seriously. I think exactly. I think that's. And the music got a little more serious because they, Sammy Hagar is a different type of lyricist. Yeah.
I think it's weird because I think of the movie School of Rock. The scenario with Jack Black where he's the goofball in the band and whatever, and they decide to go and they kick him out of the band, and they doing this more song structured. It's almost like the same kind of thing because they're taking it too seriously, and he wants to be the goofball. So I always think of that and that parallel there. That just I wonder if that's what they were actually thinking about when they conceived that movie. Like when they wrote it, like what are they thinking of Van Halen or bands like in that situation? So
could be, or could just be Jack Black too. I mean, Jack Black. It brings a certain type.
Sure, but it's just
you're getting Jack Black when you get him in a movie. That's like getting Jack Nicholson. You get Jack Black when he's in a movie. You're getting like the Jack Black character. Yeah, too. It's like kind of he brings that weirdness to it. But yeah, it's just one of those things with, and we talk about it a lot, where those weird decisions that get made that end up changing the course of like music history. Mm-hmm. Just some strange things. And what this one was the Lamborghini. Was Eddie Van Halen's Lamborghini was fixed by the same guy that worked on Sammy Hagar's. And this guy put them in touch, said, hey, maybe, why don't you meet up with Sammy? It's just one of those weird happenstances. Yeah. And they consider him because they were talking about, it came out recently that Patti Smythe, the singer from Scandal, Goodbye to You, she said she was approached before this by Eddie Van Halen to join Van Halen. And she said she didn't want to. She said, I'm not going to do it. So she was actually before the whole Sammy Hagar thing, Patti Smythe was like at the top of the list. And back then she was pretty hot commodity because, she had that song, The Warrior, and Scandal was a pretty hot, and she has a really hot smoking voice. I mean, she could probably handle it. But she declined. And then they go with Sammy Hagar and they go rocketing into the stars. I mean, Van Halen would get their number one album with 5150. They would hit number one with it. So it was certainly, as much as some people derided it, there was another faction that was also ready to embrace the new sound, and they really didn't look back. They really just kind of went forward with Sammy. And they got some great stuff out of that. That song Right Now, that used to be on MTV. That was all over the place, that song, that video. And Finish What You Started. And as someone who wasn't a giant Sammy Hagar fan, I appreciated what he brought. He brought like a stabilizing force to Van Halen and made it more of a rock band than a rock show.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And he didn't,
musicality wise,
it changed the dynamic where David Lee Roth David Lee Roth was trying to just kind of keep his kind of character out there just because to not be overshadowed. But then you got like a pro like Sammy Hagar who's not bringing that kind of baggage with him. Where he's not trying to outdo anybody or get the spotlight on him. He understands what his function is, and he executed it really well. I really have no complaints about the Van Hagar era.
No, I don't either. I mean, like, you say, but I mean, I prefer when I think of Van Halen. Look, I like the
It's
first.
rough. It's rough.
I like
Yeah.
the first 4 albums. Okay, I kind of grew up on like that first album. My brother had it. I think he had pretty much all of them. So he thinks that I know nothing about Van Halen, but he's wrong. Because when he wasn't home, I was listening to this stuff.
There you go.
I was immersing myself in it, so I knew, what they were doing, and so yeah, it was a departure. It was definitely, but you have to consider everyone was doing it though. Everyone was adapting to the time.
Yeah,
The MTV era, trying something new, playing with all the new toys of the period, and most, in this case, synthesizers, and so. Does this album hold up for me? 84? I think in a more nostalgic way it does. Maybe it's because it was overplayed too. So it kind of, it's not as strong for me now, but yeah, I mean, it was a staple back then. And I just had I just remember having a lot of great times with great friends with this music being played in the background.
Yep.
So if you're going to take anything from it, it's that, and I'm okay with that. At least, I mean, that's going to be my thing for it. And it's,
and the thing is, it doesn't sound dated per se because it wasn't it didn't have that slick gloss that we talk about on the 80s, on, those 80s produced, artists.
It didn't have
that sheen and that shine on it that it did. Right. And also Van Halen was still true to Van Halen. It wasn't like Van Halen was going to jump in on the electronic style like Erasure or, like I said, or like Flock of Seagulls or any of that. They were using synths, but not in that way, not like Eurythmics with like drum machines and stuff like that. Yeah. So it sounds like it doesn't sound like it's from the 80s per se. It sounds like it's Van Halen.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you could fit this in almost minus Jump and I'll Wait. You could slide most of these into almost any other album. You could probably mix up Diver Down and these 2 albums together, and
that's right.
Probably not have too much where people would be able to pick out like what it was from. It's not a great leap, but there's nothing wrong with that. The leap would come after this, right? The new Hagar sound was on the horizon with Sammy Hagar, and that was the thing. It was probably going to happen with or without Roth. The fact that Roth wasn't there, I think, made it a little bit easier for everybody else to make that adjustment too. It's like, okay, this is a new lead singer, and it doesn't sound like the old Van Halen per se.
Yeah.
So, okay. It's not like Sammy Hagar was going to do an impression of David Lee Roth, because that would just be disastrous.
No.
And he didn't sound like him either. He's going to
be Sammy Hagar. He's going to be himself, and he was. Totally was. You know.
So. And then unfortunately, that relationship would burn brightly, and the Van Halens would burn through Sammy Hagar, and that would end in animosity. And then I guess they thought, well, we could replicate this recipe again. So they get Gary Cherone from Extreme for one album for Van Halen 3, which wasn't well received. I heard some of the stuff. It's not horrible, but at that point, you start to get a reputation as well. If you're going through lead singers, it's probably not at that point, like back in the day, you probably could have blamed, it's like, oh, well, David Lee Roth is just difficult. He's an a-hole. Look at him. Look at how he acts. And you probably could have made the case, but now Sammy Hagar's on the outs with them too. Yeah. After everything he had done with them, now you have to start questioning where the problems are.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't work with Gary Cherone. And then they were, and I actually, in between that, they had talked in between Sammy and Gary Cherone, they flirted with Roth again. He recorded a couple of songs for their greatest hits. He thought he was coming back. He shot his mouth off a little too early, and they're like, no, forget it. So they went with Gary Cherone, and then then they went into kind of hiatus for a while. It just got crazy. And then they jettisoned, Michael Anthony
Yeah, and that's
and
when
just kind
David
of
Lee Roth actually came back.
yeah, he came back,
We got
and
his son in the band.
yeah, they got his son, and in the beginning that irked me. I'm like Wolfgang Van Halen. He was like 16. I'm like, what is this guy doing playing with Van Halen? It's like what like what's the deal? It turned out that Eddie Van Halen said he was not gonna tour unless he could bring his son out. He wanted to play with his son. So in the beginning, I was like, oh, what's the deal with this? But then it kind of made a little more sense. He's like, well, this is, I'm not going out if this doesn't happen. So I was like, oh, all right, I guess so. And yeah, and then Roth would come back, and then Sammy Hagar was in Chicken Foot with Michael Anthony, and then they have that one, The Circle now. So Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony are pretty okay. And then they get inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2007, and that was just another like stain on the Van Halen legacy. Because Roth wanted to sing Jump like at the induction, but Velvet Revolver, who was going to be playing with them, didn't rehearse that. They said, well, we're going to do You Really Got Me or whatever. And he's like, well, I'm not coming then. And then the Van Halens didn't come. So it was like Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony were there. It's like, these are the times like to put all that aside. You're getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Put it aside.
Exactly. The band's called Van Halen and they don't show up.
Smile for one night, and then you guys can go your separate ways and never speak again if you need to. It's just like it's just like a set. Like all this animosity and acrimony in public. It doesn't look good. And again, it made the Van Halen brothers just look even worse, because it looked like these guys were the problems, that they just couldn't get along with anybody, no matter what. It was like we're chucking Roth, we're chucking Hagar, we're chucking Michael Anthony. They can't decide on lead singers. No one can work with them. So it just became really weird.
Wasn't there one point where Eddie and Alex were at odds too? I think they were having problems too. I think I've read, that was going on as well.
They all had their share of substance issues. So that it's got to count for something, unfortunately. And then, Wolfgang Van Halen ends up touring with them and becoming the bassist. And then Eddie kind of gets sick, and he passes away, unfortunately. So there's a lot of probably things left unsaid, unfortunately. A chapter that is unwritten. Van Halen had been touring again with Roth, and they were kind of out there, but I don't know. It just still didn't seem like it was finished the right way.
No, not at all. After all these years, even when David Lee Roth came back, I don't know. It
wasn't the same.
It wasn't the same. No,
because he's got no voice too. He's done.
It almost felt like
so it's gonna be a little rough.
Yeah. But it's like you say. Even in his personal life, he divorced Valerie Bertinelli, and so that tacked on with everything else that was happening in the band too. So yeah, who was Eddie Van Halen? What was he like? What was going through his head? We really don't know.
We don't know. He was supposedly always working on new music, supposedly had new music. I don't know if that will ever be revealed, by his son. And that's where Mammoth comes back in. So Wolfgang Van Halen, it turns out, is probably a musical prodigy. Because he decides to to carry on, and he becomes a self-contained unit called Mammoth WVH, Mammoth Wolfgang Van Halen. That's not a group. He does everything, and I'm quite impressed with what I've heard so far. He's got a couple of singles out. One was kind of like a pop rock song, and then another one was just straight up rock song. And you know what? I gotta say, Color Me impressed with. I was a little doubtful, but once I hear, I always love, I love artists that do everything. So that kind of like got me right there. It's like he like Mammoth WVH is the name of the band, or that's the name of whatever it is, but he is everything. He does it all, which is neat. I love that kind of stuff.
I have to check it out. I haven't heard it, but
yeah, he's absolute. And then he does we're going to go a little inside baseball, but his latest music video is of it's all Wolfgang Van Halen's. One is singing, one's playing guitar, one is playing bass, one is playing, drums. Like, they're all Wolfgang Van Halen, showing that he's the whole band. Which Jeff Lynne had done in a video a few years ago. I'll just leave that there for Mercy. He was all Jeff Lynne's. But so that got my attention too when I saw the video of all the Wolfgang Van Halens. I'm like, oh, I've seen that before, so let me see how this works out. But really good. Highly recommend Mammoth WVH. Does not sound like Van Halen. Okay, so kind of put that aside. If you're thinking, well, this is going to be like its dad, no one is like Eddie Van Halen, first of all, and no one probably ever will be. And this is just straight ahead rock and roll, and it's good stuff. It's really good.
Oh, I'll check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend it. Okay. So that's it for Van Halen. Aged. Yeah. Does it get better with age? I'm not sure. I think it just gets more Van Halen with age. If there's such a thing, right?
There you go.
I don't think it gets better or worse with Van Halen. It's just, I think Van Halen is kind of frozen in time as Van Halen. It's a particular sound, it's a particular groove, it's a particular feeling that you get with Van Halen. And 1984 delivers on that plus, right? It was something new on the horizon. It was a signaling of something happening, but still grounded in what everybody was coming to expect from Van Halen.
Yeah. To me, it's the nostalgia. This particular album is all the most nostalgic for me in terms of, but again, I like their, if I'm going to sit down and listen to Van Halen at this point in time, it's going to be the earlier stuff. To me, that was like the raw, the core of that band was just, they were, that first album, I mean, it's right out the gate, they were just killing it. I love that record, and I love Fair Warning. Those are my two favorites. And Fair Warning is by no means, I think, one of their best. It may be, I don't know. But like I said before, I just really like the funky aspect of that. A lot of the songs on that album, you think of Mean Street and oh God, these Dirty Movies, Unchained, which would be a huge live, they do that song. Yep. That was one of their biggest live performance songs. People went nuts every time they heard that.
Yep.
One. So,
yeah, that was a big one. Big crowd pleaser.
But
absolutely.
But that's it for me. I mean, I just remember having a lot of great times with that album being played in the background. And that's what I take away from it. More so than, I guess, the music aspect of it, but it's Van Halen though. It is,
it connects you though, right? I mean, the music is connecting you to a feeling. So that's what's important there is, and I feel the same way about it too, because it was of its time, only because again, Van Halen would radically change. So it's not like they stayed with David Lee Roth but changed their sound. This was like I said in the beginning, in the open, it was the closing of one chapter and the opening of another one. And basically to wrap up, that's exactly what this is. This was the last album with the classic Van Halen lineup, because when they reformed in 2006 or 2007, whenever they did that other album, Michael Anthony was not included. So this is the last album with the original four members of Van Halen, before the animosity, before the backbiting, and just before all the bad feelings. They delivered something that was it was just a monster album. Their effect on MTV was felt throughout the year with their videos, and you're not going to get someone better of his time than Eddie Van Halen. I mean, he came in after Clapton, after Page. There was there was a gap there, and Eddie Van Halen filled that gap, I think.
Yeah,
he's
definitely, he's unique.
Yeah,
there was nobody else. Even if it's like sometimes some of the things he didn't. I mean, it's very sort of technical and sort of flashy and that kind of thing, which is not my favorite style of guitar playing. But for what he did and what he brought to it, the instrument, he definitely stands out as one of the greatest.
He was, and he was an absolute innovator in guitar technique. People were wondering how he got those sounds. So you'll hear a decent amount of that on 1984. So it's definitely a recommendation from us. Like I said, the last album of the classic Van Halen lineup. So find it, 1984, and it's very easy to remember if you do trivia because it came out in the same year. So that's a win if you're at trivia. Piece of cake for that one. That's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. For Eric, my name is Dean. We appreciate you listening and we appreciate your support. And we will see you on the flip side.